I'm Kathy Caroli, and I would like to offer some comments about the solo from Beethoven's Third Symphony, the Eroica, last movement. I think this, if I were to create an audition with one excerpt on it, this would be the one. I think this excerpt demonstrates everything about control and musicality in flute playing. From the intonation of the fortissimo F octaves, to the subito pianos that happen frequently in this, to rhythm and keeping a steady pulse, to articulation and double tonguing, to having a beautiful sound on the opening theme. I can't think of a better excerpt for all of that. So let's just talk through it. I'll play it and then we'll go back and break it apart. So many times in teaching these excerpts, playing an excerpt like this for an audition is really different from playing in an orchestra. For one thing, despite the fact that Beethoven has given the tempo marking of half note equals 76, I can promise you I've never played it anywhere near that tempo in the orchestra. In fact, in the orchestra it often ends up being quite a bit slower than we like to play it in auditions. So, having said that, I wouldn't go too quickly. I would think probably 126 to 132 to the quarter note is plenty fast. Like I said before, the intonation on the opening Fs is really critical. I use the ring finger on my right hand to bring the intonation down on the high F. It just slightly lowers the pitch. I still really have to aim down to keep those Fs from going sharp. And of course, I lift that finger for the lower octave. At letter B, I actually use my middle right hand finger for the F sharp. Even though it's a flatter note and I don't want my F sharp to be flat or flatter fingering, I find that I get a quicker response, especially since I'm doing a subito piano. Anytime you have a subito dynamic, or in other words, a dynamic where there's no crescendo or diminuendo mark to prepare it, I like to do the opposite of what one might do. So in the bar before B, I make a crescendo on those Fs. It's a big exaggeration. The next key is to be able to play the phrase at B with a beautiful piano in the upper register. This is something that is, I think, hard to do, and especially to play it with a good tempo and in rhythm. The first thing I would do is get control over your high register. So as I've talked about before, I like to use harmonic fingerings a lot. If I were to play this phrase at B with all low octave fingerings overblowing to the top octave, I get a lot of resistance from my lips. This is really good for helping you figure out how to control your air and how to control your embouchure. You'll find that when you go back to the regular third octave fingerings, that you can play with considerable ease. The next thing is to make sure that you're really feeling the second beat. In other words, the dot. So I find it helpful in this excerpt, as well in so many other ones, is to really feel the second beat. So if I were to put my metronome on, let's see, 63, which is half of 126, yes, and play it on the offbeats, it will show you exactly where the second beat is supposed to come. The next thing is to make a crescendo on the A's. I wouldn't play these too short or too long. And you want to make sure that sforzando on the last A, dotted quarter, has a lot of vibrato. And then you're back to piano in measure 183. Okay, the next critical thing is that in 184 you have an appoggiatura. So many times I hear players do this. Okay, but it should be the opposite. Forte in the F sharp, piano on the E. So it's worth just practicing that a lot before you go on, take a breath, and add the pickup D. Gradually making that space for the breath shorter and shorter, but not giving up the musicality of the phrase. Again, here, it's hard to get control in piano of these high notes with articulations. I would go back to my harmonic fingerings. And as I've said before, it's not so important that you're 100% accurate with which partial's coming out. Just the act of doing this will help you strengthen and get more control over where you're aiming your air and how to make the correct embouchure for those high notes. Another thing that I really like to do, where you have the crescendo on the high A's, A is a super resistant harmonic note, but it's really helpful to practice playing the low fingering and overblow to the top octave. Here, the crescendo is marked to the subito piano. The subito piano is in measure 191, so it's very important to practice that under tempo. And I'm doing it really slowly so I can make sure that I'm practicing getting that piano to happen. Up to tempo. And then again, in measure 192, you have another strong, weaker, weakest on the F sharp, and E. So before you take your breath, but prior to the first 2 16ths, you need to make sure you've done a nice diminuendo. Again, gradually shortening that space. And making sure that you're aiming in the right place for the low A. I will say that in this passage, with all of these eighth note staccato notes, I'm tonguing almost in the th position. My tongue is extremely far forward, and that way I feel like I can get the most control and response within piano of all those notes. One thing I like to think about, and I do this in the Mendelssohn Scherzo too, for measure 192, is while I'm taking the breath, I'm having my tongue ready and forward for the 16th notes, A and C sharp. So that they're ready to go as soon as I start my air. Those notes are ready to come out. As far as the 16th notes go, I think it's nice to kind of shape the phrase like the contour of the line, making sure that you are, all those notes are in really good focus. You can watch my tutorial about middle register articulation. And then I like to really think in contrary motion on this as well, especially in measure 198. So there I'm really thinking up. I'm playing like I do in Scherzo. I'm thinking long and playing long, but at this tempo it will sound detached. They're not staccatos written and it doesn't say anything about playing super short. You should just be detached, but with a really clear sound. And then lastly, in measure 199, I like to start the trill on the E. It would have been perhaps optional, but I think what we need to hear harmonically is the E resolving to the D. And again, I would make a diminuendo into the downbeat of 200. So like I said, when I started talking about this, there's so much going on in this excerpt. It's all really important. It takes a lot of control, I think a lot of practice, and a lot of analysis. I would record myself frequently playing this to make sure that I'm doing what I think I'm doing, and break it apart into little pieces. So hopefully that's encouraging and not intimidating. Feel free to send me feedback or make any requests. CatherineCaroli@gmail.com. Thank you so much for watching.